Well, hello everyone and welcome back to day 7 and session number 17 of the AMBA and BGA Business School Leaders Forum, brought to you by GoToWebinar by LogMeIn. I'm David Woods-Hale, Director of Marketing and Communications at AMBA and BGA, joining you from London today. And for this session, I'm delighted to be joined by Andy Roughton, Managing Director of GMAC Media Solutions, Business Because, and Marco De Novellis, Editor of Business Because. They're going to talk us through how to create a winning content marketing strategy, and I'll let them introduce themselves in a second. But if you haven't joined one of these sessions before, we want your experience to be as interactive as possible. So you can ask questions and put forward comments to our speakers. Just pop them in the little box in your control panel, and I'll try and get through as many of them as I can towards the end of the session. Please also feel free to share your thoughts and musings on the social channel of your choice using the hashtag BSLF. And I'll be on the line throughout the webinar if you've got any queries or want to run anything past me. Just pop them in the Q&A box and I'll come straight back to you. We'll also put some useful pieces of information as to how you can make the most of the forum throughout the session, as well as some links, so just keep an eye out for those. I think I've spoken for long enough, so to take us through the rest of the session, I will now pass over to Andy and Marco.
Thanks, David, and hello everyone. Thanks for joining us. Appreciate it. I don't know if we can still say it's a strange time. It's become the new normal. So but appreciate you joining us anyway. We hope everybody's keeping well. Marco and I are going to spend the next 30 to 45 minutes talking about how to create a winning content marketing strategy. In an increasingly competitive market, we think content marketing is an essential way to develop your brand and promote your school to candidates in an engaging, authentic and effective way. But first of all, a little bit more on the introductions that David's just set up there. My name's Andy Roughton, as well as being the Managing Director of Business Because. And for those of you who don't know, we're an online publisher focused on graduate management education. We've got an audience of prospective candidates. I'm also the Managing Director of GMAC's Media Solutions. I've been around 20 years in publishing, and before that in a number of marketing agencies specializing in content marketing and providing those services to some of the world's biggest brands. So my heritage is very much in this space, in this particular discipline of marketing. And I'm joined by Marco. He's the editor at Business Because, and Marco's team works directly with a number of business schools around the globe, creating compelling content marketing activity and campaigns. So we're going to take you through a 5-step guide to creating a winning content marketing strategy with some insider tips on SEO and social media sprinkled throughout. And then, of course, we'd love to hear from you. So if you're able to share your marketing challenges, ask any questions that you have, please do so, and we'll get to those towards the end. So with I think on that note, I'm going to pass over to Marco to get into some of the detail.
Absolutely, thanks Andy, and hi everyone. So before we get into those sort of steps to creating a winning content marketing strategy, it's worth having a quick recap. What is content marketing? So there's a phrase you've all heard of, but worth looking at the definition again here. I think the key words that you'll see here are valuable, relevant, and consistent. So value separates content marketing out from other forms of advertising. This is not a billboard you might see at a train station. Your audience should be naturally interested in your story. You should offer them value. The content should be relevant to that target audience, and the content should be consistent, meaning the same themes should be promoted throughout different pieces of content and spread across different channels, and these themes should tie a content campaign together. So make sure you keep this definition of content marketing as a strategic approach, focused on creating and distributing valuable, relevant, and consistent content in mind when creating your content campaign. So how can content marketing help you as business schools? Well, very simply, if you share positive, effective content online, people are more likely to become interested in your business school than if you don't. That's quite commonsensical. But here's a few stats from the Content Marketing Institute. Firstly, almost half of the key age demographic for graduate business school programs across Masters, MBA, and EMBA programs get their news and information online, and that is certainly the case for undergraduate business school programs as well. And content marketing is more successful than outbound marketing, basically adverts, in generating leads. And it can also be more successful and effective than paid search. So the cost up front for content marketing is typically lower and the benefits last longer. Whereas with Google AdWords, paid search, you need to keep putting money into it to get the results. With content marketing, you create a piece of content that stays online, it's evergreen, it gets shared and reshared, it builds its own momentum over time. And then the more content you create, the more search engine index pages you end up with on the internet that link back to your site. And that content can lead to traffic, which leads to leads. Now, as we all know, coronavirus is impacting business school candidates across the world. And something I'm often keen to emphasize is the importance of content marketing when it comes to overcoming challenges around context. So that could be around the political environment in your country, for instance, political situation in the US or Brexit in the UK, or if your country suffers a natural disaster or terrorist attack. And more than anything, today's context with coronavirus, these external issues do impact candidates and the perception they have of your school. However, whatever the challenges you face, you can overcome them if you have a strong enough brand, which will help your business school stand out to prospective students, whatever those challenges. So the key thing here is don't underestimate your brand. For example, if Harvard Business School was if Boston, Massachusetts was particularly badly affected by coronavirus and Harvard was badly affected, people would still want to go to Harvard down the line because of that brand name. Even though coronavirus has hit Italy hard, when I think of Bocconi in Milan, for example, I think of its strength in finance and fashion, for example. For Siebes in China, I think of it as an international Chinese school rather than the fact that coronavirus is going on. Content marketing helps you define and promote your brand to build a strong brand that can resonate with your target audience so you can overcome challenges like coronavirus and instead have prospective students associate your brand with the key theme you want to promote. So be it a strength in finance or entrepreneurship, or even a feeling like positivity or openness. And so especially in the current climate, the message is content marketing can really help you. But content marketing can only help you connect with prospective students if it's done effectively. And to do so, we suggest following these 5 steps, which we're going to talk through on today's webinar. And for each one, we'll give you some case studies and examples from different business schools. And you'll be able to sort of learn from them as we go along. So step 1 is about establishing your goals. It's a straightforward one. You really need to know what your goals are, what you're creating content for before you launch a content marketing campaign. Is it about building brand awareness or generating applications to your business school, or both? What do you want to achieve with the content? Then who is the audience you're trying to reach? What themes you want to push and promote? Where will the content sit? Asking yourself the why, who, what, where before you launch a content marketing campaign can be especially helpful. And how you answer these different questions should dictate the type of content you create, and also what your call to action CTA is for each content piece. So it's really important for the campaign as a whole, and also each piece of content within the campaign, to think, what do I want my audience to do next? Whether that's inquire for more information about your school, register for a webinar, for example, or download a brochure. What's the journey here? And you should also think about your goals for each piece of content within the campaign and how that piece of content will serve and create value for your audience. So here's some useful content buckets. And you can think about the purpose of each piece of content and which of these buckets your content falls into. So is this piece of content that I'm creating, is it an entertain and inspire me type piece? Is it, for example, a career success story of an international alum who's transitioned to work in his or her dream job? Will it be a help for me, a quick video guide to visa applications or applying to business school during COVID-19? Will it be a piece of content that helps candidates decide between an MBA or master's program? Or will it be a piece of content that keeps makes the reader return for more? Now, here's an example of a school with very strong goals that we worked with at Business Because, and it purposely shows a school you all know. Stanford is obviously very strongly associated with entrepreneurship, but working with us, they wanted to get away from that and to showcase their other strengths, reach out to people from non-traditional backgrounds when it comes to MBA candidates, and also make use of their own alumni community to showcase that a Stanford MBA is about more than just entrepreneurship. And so having those clear goals at the start made for a very focused and effective campaign. And you can see some of the content we created introduces these other themes and shows a wide variety of career options for Stanford MBA students. Now, step 2 has a lot of overlap with step 1 about understanding your audience, and that's because your goals should be absolutely tied to the wants and needs of your target audience. Because your audience are your potential customers, knowing who they are, what they're interested in, what stage of the application process they're at is a crucial step in building that successful content marketing strategy. And there's lots to consider. You can sort of jump into the Google Analytics and look at ages, geographies, whether people are using mobile or desktop, what time of day they're looking at your content. There's lots you can do there. In the current climate with coronavirus, think about and track and investigate how your audience's priorities, interests, and behaviors are changing. For example, we certainly saw a shift from mobile to desktop as more people were working and studying at home. And certainly on the Business Because site, we saw traffic increase during at the height of the outbreak of the coronavirus pandemic, and what people wanted also started to change as people were more and more interested in informational content, what's happening with application deadlines, what does the current situation mean for the MBA programs I'm applying to, and the like. So think about how their behaviors and what they're after are changing. And specific to GME as well, graduate management education, think about the application funnel, as I said. So on the screen, you've got a very basic picture of the application funnel. And you can use this just to ask yourself, are the people you're targeting right at the beginning or towards the end of their application journeys? Can you engage with candidates at every different stage here?
But of course, we all know that buyer behavior is rarely a straight line descent through a funnel, much as we might like it to be. So this Forrester map that you can see here of B2B buyer behavior starts to feel a little bit more like what our candidates go through when they're making the decisions that could shape the rest of their career. The key point here being that with so many stages, double backs, intersections, it's critical to be present when your target audience are asking their questions. It's what Google call the zero moment of truth, or as someone else once said, 80% of success is just showing up. And content marketing provides the opportunity to do just that. This next slide and the last point on this, and appreciate this is super small, but at GMAC we did a lot of research into mapping the journey of early career professionals, and as you can see, it's an incredibly complex picture. So thinking about your audience and what stage of the journey they might be at can be incredibly useful in planning your content strategy.
And another thing you can do is build out those audience profiles. So GMAC as well helpfully does this for you already. And GMAC categorizes prospective students into 7 categories, which you can see here, from respect seekers, so people who care a lot about ranking and reputation when choosing a school, to global strivers, people who want international careers, and all the way across bottom right to impactful innovators, so socially minded entrepreneurs. And depending on what type of candidate you're targeting, you'll want to focus your content on different things. So we've got a great example of this, actually, a school who really understood who their target audience was. We worked with St. Gallen in Switzerland, and specifically their SIM Master in Management program. Now, this program is ranked #1 in the world by the Financial Times, and it naturally attracts a lot of respect seekers. But St. Gallen wanted to move away from this and use content to attract more global strivers and impactful innovators. So they focused their campaign on showcasing the reasons, the substance behind the #1 ranking, rather than just pushing the ranking itself, and communicating their emphasis on value-driven leadership, the study experience, the long-lasting value of the degree, that it's about more than just getting a job. And so this was really a great example of how their key campaign goal was really driven by an understanding of their audience and their target audience. And a separate example, we also know, and we've worked with Singapore Management University, for example, who have actually mapped their intake against these GMAC audience segments that you saw on the previous slide, so they can work out what kind of candidate is most attractive to their different types of programs, and then apply that learning to their outbound marketing activity. So I think we're on to step 3. You've established your goals, you understand your target audience, and step 3, and almost as important as the content you create, is what are you going to do with it once it's created? Whether that's putting it on a social media channel, in a newsletter, what page of your website, this all needs to be in your mind from the point of creation before you even create the content itself. Now, interestingly, where you're going to put your content, email is still a top choice for where candidates prefer to hear from business schools. So a GMAC survey showed 92% of candidates said email is where they'd most like to receive information from schools interested in their profiles. And I believe there's some recent GMAC research which has seen the impact of COVID on this, and still email is well preferred by candidates. And obviously social media is a key place to engage candidates. And for social media, AGAC, so the Association of Graduate Admission Consultants, surveyed MBA applicants last year and asked them which social media websites they go to find information on business schools. And these are MBA candidates, and they majority do live in the US. But interestingly, they concluded that LinkedIn is the most popular social media channel among candidates, followed by YouTube, so the increasing importance of video content, and then Facebook. And they also found that platforms like Quora, the question and answer platform, is more popular among MBA candidates than Twitter, for example. And when sharing on social media, the audiences of each of these social channels should dictate the kind of content you're putting on there and the kind of formats that work best. So you need to delve into their audiences as well. You know, we all know Facebook is very important. You still need to post there, 2 billion users, but do think about looking beyond Facebook when promoting and sharing content. As we've mentioned, you know, on LinkedIn, it's very business career focused. Even on sites like Reddit, which has more active users than Twitter, and worth noting again, the audience there is 70% male. And on Pinterest, 80% of users there are female, and Instagram, where almost 90% of users are under 35 years old. And what we've done for you on the coming slides is just put together some quick post checklists to think about before you share content on Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter. So we've just targeted those key platforms. And I think we'll be able to arrange sharing a copy of the presentation, so you'll be able to have these to go away with. So we won't go into too much detail here, but something important to note about Facebook, and something I'm sure you're aware of and will have experienced, is that you really need to pay to get your content seen there. It's actually estimated that no more than 5.5% of your community see your organic content on Facebook. So you really just have to put a little bit of money behind a post to extend its reach and get some traction. And often it's as little as $25, £25. And especially where a post is performing well organically, it's worth boosting it to extend your reach. And again, with these checklists, just remember every platform is different. There's different audiences, and each platform needs a different type of content approach. So we'll just skip through these, but again, we'll get these over to you, and they will be useful to look at.
And just to build on what Marco was saying there, whilst the AGAC survey showed the social platforms that candidates are going to look for information, that's not necessarily the same as the channels you should use to be sharing your content. But if they're searching for information on LinkedIn, then that's useful. You can use more informative type of content because that's a lean-in experience from the candidate. But whilst on Facebook, it's a more lean-back experience, perhaps. And so the sort of content that you might want to be posting there might be more inspirational in its approach, because they're not actively there looking for information about education, about their study options. But if something inspiring comes up, then they might engage with it. So there's a lot to consider in terms of how you use the platforms and the sort of content that you're creating and sharing, and making sure that it's appropriate to how the audience is reacting and feeling on those channels. Sorry.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and yeah, very much depends on your goals as well. Not only what audience you want to engage, but also, are you looking at higher up the funnel? Are you looking at direct conversions? We've found generally on Business Because Facebook, paid for promotion on Facebook can be very effective, and LinkedIn as well, and LinkedIn tends to get less of a yield, less of a numbers than Facebook does, but they may be better quality leads, for example, than Facebook, because you have that focused careers audience. So there's a lot of things to bear in mind. But here's just picked out some examples from business schools who've developed content that's especially well suited for that specific social media channel. So just going from left to right, Johns Hopkins did a student takeover on Instagram. So again, personal video content aimed at that younger audience. London Business School using images, hashtag why I love LBS, also on Instagram and works well on Twitter. Again, engaging with students and alumni using your existing assets. And then Siebes in China with great results with a Facebook campus tour led by student ambassadors. So again, think about what content works best where. And step 4, I think we're going straight on. Now this is a little bit different. So this is about attracting an audience to your website directly rather than on or through social media. So if you want to attract traffic to the content on your school website over time, you'll need to do some SEO, some search engine optimization. And this essentially means ensuring your content is worded and structured in a way that helps it appear in internet search results, Google search results. So before you decide what content to include in your campaign, do some keyword research to find out what people actually search for when they're searching for online MBAs, for example. You'll need to assess the competition. Are there other sites already performing well for that search term? How realistic is it for me to go for that? Then make sure, once you've decided on your keywords, that you optimize your content, checking it includes the target keywords in the right places, the title, the meta description, the body of the text. And you can use various tools to do this. And I've used Moz, M-O-Z, in the video examples on screen here, but there's various other tools. Now, SEO is not an exact science, and it tends to fill people with a lot of dread. And there's a lot at play here. So there's factors like site speed, mobile optimization, backlinks to your site. These are all very important when it comes to SEO. But it is worth investing time in, as performing well in organic search results can really help your content go further for free. And when it comes to creating content for SEO purposes, from a content perspective, you need to think about what things people are searching for and what things will last and be relevant a year or two down the line. So picked out some good and bad examples. Here are some good examples of SEO ready, evergreen content that's always going to be useful. How to apply for a visa, why to do an MBA, a guide to life in a city. Interestingly, bottom left is a Chinese school And this is an interesting example. This is an independent study by a professor at the school on China's business outlook, based on a monthly survey of company-owning business school alumni. So this is great research content that journalists can reference and link back to about China's economic outlook, business outlook, and that will build a website's domain authority and search rank. So again, using your existing assets, your professors. The next slide is some not so good examples. These aren't necessarily bad content pieces, they still have value, but essentially they're not great in terms of SEO strength. So the HBS Dean story, Trump versus Clinton, 2016 headline there, they're obviously all time sensitive, not evergreen, they don't have that longer term value, and Google really hates old, outdated content. So you might want to repurpose this content, rejig it for the current climate. We're doing a lot of that at the moment with old pieces, for instance, on online MBAs, for example, just updating it and tweaking it for the current environment and getting references to what's going on in the world today, updating dates, changing links can really boost your search ranking. And finally, bottom right here, this one's more about headlines. So the Turn the Office into a Lab feature on INSEAD's blog. It's a fairly recent article, but it's not necessarily searchable. There's no searchable terms in that headline. So you would want to do a bit of keyword research and change the headline up to get that picked up by a larger audience on Google.
Yeah, and just to repeat Marco's point, that none of these pieces are necessarily bad content, but it's about how that content is positioned and how it's being used. I think there's a lot of value in doing more newsworthy and timely and reactive content, but you need to have a mix of that alongside the longer tail search friendly content. So again, it comes back to that original point of thinking about why you're creating the content in the first place. The last step is a critical one. It's about understanding what is success. I always talk about what good looks like. As you might have guessed from the image here, I'm afraid there's no holy grail answer to this particular question. Measuring the success of content marketing it's multi-layered. There's so many measurables. There are different sources of analytics. There is context that needs to be applied. However, there are some steps that you can take in order to assess things and then delve deeper as required. So a lot of content marketing, particularly as we've talked about, if it's focused on brand building or brand awareness, is a little longer term in focus. It's very easy to get drawn into the sort of vanity metrics like social follows or likes, but the best approach is probably to think back to those original goals that we've talked about a few times, and establish what your success criteria was before you started. And then at that point, think about what the appropriate time frame is for measuring that performance. If you're looking for longer tail search relevance, then you're going to be looking at a much longer time frame for that sort of piece to convert. If the article itself is a more sort of top of funnel awareness, inspirational sort of piece, then again, you can't necessarily expect that to drive a click straight away and be able to measure that all the way through. Brand uplift is a soft measure, so it's very difficult to quantify it unless you've got the sorts of budgets where you can do some sort of brand tracking survey and do before and after activity, and that's rare and going to be even rarer in an environment now where of course budgets are being cut across the board. So another way of looking at that and looking at the effectiveness is something as simple as applicant surveys. So asking people who are applying to tick off just different touch points that they might have experienced along the way. We know that any content that we create is going to be one of a number of different pieces that have that come together and culminate in that application or that inquiry. But remember, as we said before, being present when your prospect is looking is the key. They might not always recognize the influence that one piece of content had on their journey. So there is some room for maneuver in there as well. Here's a few different things you can look at depending on your goals. Reads, number of reads, really simple piece. Google Analytics will tell you that. The amount of time spent on the page, the longer somebody spends on it, hopefully the more of that they're reading, the more engaged they are with that piece of content. If you push some social distribution, look at the social impressions, look at what you're getting organically, look at what you're buying, look at what the difference is between those two audiences, look at what actions people have taken off the back of it. If you've got if you've got a data capture form to be completed, or if there is a call to action, then you can look at clicks if you want them to delve into more content. Remember that where actions are being used to track performance, you've got to make sure that you need something that actually prompts that action around your piece of content. So it's no good sort of looking at the number of clicks from a piece of content if you've got nothing on there that's actually telling people to click for more. Reads and time spent are of course a slightly specious without context. So it's always worth establishing some benchmarks for what good looks like beforehand. What we've got on here is how we've reported an anonymized, for the sake of this presentation, article that we published in November of last year. Average sponsored article reads on Business Because are around the 1,000 mark. So as you can see here, this client school has got a strong performance on reads. A decent amount of time spent on page 2. So suggesting those page views are converting into actual engagement. We're now looking at how we track scroll depth as well, in order to understand how much of an article is being read, and where we're doing video content, view through rates, and those sorts of things are all important to keeping an eye on too. More prosaically, tracking codes in order to power sort of attribution modeling. Can be a useful tool to follow readers once they've left. It can be effective depending on the distribution strategy. The caveat to that being, with the changes to third-party cookie access coming soon, this is going to be a little bit more difficult to execute. So we're looking at how we can best utilize our first-party data in order that we can follow candidates across platforms, from Business Because through to all the way through MBA.com and through registering for a GMAC on that platform, and beyond, when we look at their score sending data and application process. So joining the dots between our audience across those different channels is all useful ways of trying to measure the value of the execution of the content that's created. And finally, of course, whatever you learn, you've got to loop it back into your next activity. Use what you have found out to inform your future approach, to inform your future content, to inform your distribution strategies. Content marketing, firm believer, is an always-on strategy. So it needs nurture, it needs evolution in order for it to work most effectively.
Yeah, and just as a last word on that, once you've created the content marketing plan, just take that step back to review it and ask yourself whether you've taken the 5 steps we've spoken about today. Does the plan deliver on your goals? Will it make you stand out in a crowded market? Does it deliver against an audience's need? Ultimately, as I said at the start, the power of content marketing is how it can really help define your brand and get your brand into the minds of prospective students. And as Andy said, the rewards for this may be longer term, but especially in the current climate where you're dealing with changing application volumes and potential impact on the perception candidates have of your school, we certainly think content marketing is essential when it comes to promoting yourself and keeping your brand top of mind.
And that's that's the end of our presentation. Now it's your turn to ask some questions of us. So yeah, we're also very interested to hear about your marketing challenges, particularly in the current environment. Yeah, it's now over to you guys.
Thanks very much, Marco and Andy. That was fantastic. And I don't know whether you'll be pleased or terrified to know that loads of people have marketing challenges for you to offer some advice on. So the first question we've had is, sometimes there might be multiple aims for school content or different aims for different audiences. Can you pursue different themes or aims within your content and different platforms individually, or is it better to tailor the same unified theme to each platform and or audience?
Should I have a first swing at that, Marco?
Go ahead, Andy, go ahead.
I guess, yes, you can and should adapt your content strategy so that your messaging is different. I think we talked a little bit about how you adjust your tone, your angle, depending on the audience that you're approaching or that you're targeting, and the platform that you're using to reach that audience. But what I would say is that, without getting too much into sort of marketing theory, if you think back to the sort of theories of brand temples, it's got to all sound like you. You know, it's got to feel like it is coming from the same place, or you risk looking a little schizophrenic in your in your communication. So whilst the angle might be different, and you might tweak how an article is distributed with a copy line on Facebook versus how it's promoted on LinkedIn, it might ladder back to the same original theme and original article. Marco, anything you'd add to that?
Yeah, no, I'd agree with that. I guess a lot of the time it comes down to your goals, and if your goals are ultimately the same, of attracting students to the school, then it makes sense to have some thread tying the different approaches together. And even when it might be, say, your two separate marketing departments, one promoting an MBA program, one promoting a master's program, there will be some fundamentals about the business school as a whole that you want to keep communicating. There may be, and that's important, so people build that perception of what your business school is and what it means and what they think and feel when they think about your business school. So having that cohesive approach, having threads that tie different campaigns together, I think is important.
Thanks both. Okay, so somebody else is asking about, I think it's in light of COVID-19, so they're concerned that they're not 100% sure whether or not they're going to be able to have a classroom-based program in September, and they want to be able to communicate with their potential recruits around authentic, transparent communication. But they're sort of asking, what's the best way to use content marketing if they genuinely don't know what the situation is going to be? How can they sort of maintain transparency while also saying, I don't know?
Yeah, it's a great conundrum, isn't it? In a world of fluidity and ambiguity, everyone's looking for certainty, and it's very difficult to be able to give. I think this is actually where your content strategy comes into its own. I think keeping a regular cadence of communication with your audience, with your prospects, making sure that you are communicating clearly what your latest thinking is, not being afraid to go back and update is incredibly important. I think people are at the moment, it feels very forgiving in terms of how as long as you're communicating, people are happy to get something from you. I think if you go quiet, then you risk falling into a void, and that just increases the uncertainty. So that's certainly my perspective, and from the experience of working with some of our school clients, I think the more successful ones are definitely taking that approach and accepting maybe that that the return on their investment may be reduced at the moment, but acknowledging that continuing to communicate is going to be more beneficial for you in the longer term, and communicating how you're managing and how you're handling the crisis and the fallout is going to be more useful than simply disappearing and then starting up again when there is some sort of certainty, because goodness knows we don't know when that's going to be.
Yeah, I mean, some of the words you said, David, it is just about being transparent and open and honest, and people will understand that. There's nothing worse than having a broken promise, which can irrevocably damage a consumer's perception of your brand longer term. How brands act now will be remembered, and we've seen that across industries with certain airlines in particular. But it's a very important time to stay engaged with your potential customers, with your candidates, and be open and honest about, look, if we are offering a hybrid model this year, or if we are having to offer an online classes, this is what you won't get, this is what you will get. And there's a lot to be said for the long-term value of graduate management education, MBA, masters, whatever it is. So definitely I'd impress on schools to focus on the long-term value. We've done a lot of work about the value of doing an MBA degree in a time of economic downturn, and how even following the financial crisis, lots of people who found themselves stuck in their careers went to business school at that point and had longer term value. And now, okay, there's an extra dimension with face-to-face and online learning, but the long-term value of an MBA degree is what is worth stressing. That it's not, you might not necessarily get the same type of experience, but employers will still value the MBA. These are the paths you can take 2, 3, 4 years down the line. So again, be clear about what candidates are and what they might not get out of various format programs. And I guess there might be candidates who change their minds, but you'll at least avoid damaging your reputation longer term.
Yeah, I think we've seen in the prospective student surveys that the GMAC have been running that actually people aren't necessarily put off study, but they are just spending more time considering their options. So and I think Marco touched on it earlier. The audience is still out there. April was a record month for traffic on Business Because, so there's a lot of people out there and they are interested. So you still need to be making sure that you are visible to them, and how you communicate is key to that.
Great stuff. Thank you very much, both. Okay, so we've got another conundrum. This person is saying they're going to remain anonymous, as for reasons you'll soon understand. Our school currently sends daily emails, uploads social media posts, and we still have very low response rates. Do you think we should reduce our marketing to engage the audience more, or keep the same but rebrand and change our schedules, which might increase engagement? Do you believe that students and the audience are being over bombarded with marketing and therefore don't read our communications? In short, how can we make our communications better to improve engagement?
Okay, there's a lot. There's a lot to unpack there. I guess there's lots of questions I'd ask in the first instance in response, but with the information we've got, if you're emailing the same database on a daily basis, certainly instinctively that feels too much. That audience are likely to be on other databases too, so there is going to be an awful lot going into their inboxes, and a less is more approach might be more appropriate under those circumstances. Similarly, I think from a social perspective, I don't know what you're doing and how much of it is organic and how much of it is paid for. I think if you are relying on organic, then I would reduce it, because there is limited return, particularly on Facebook and Instagram, for organic posts, because obviously Facebook want you to put money behind it. If you're putting money behind every post, are you targeting the same audience on those social channels every time? We looked at the different segments, so maybe you can do some different custom audiences within the platform in order to try and make those communications work a little harder for you. I'd definitely be looking at putting together a test plan, if you haven't done so already, to see if you can track what sort of subject lines are generating the most opens, the most what sort of content is generating the most clicks, in order that you can build things from there. So I think there's a few measures that you can be taking, but certainly instinctively and based on the information given, it feels like there's probably an overload there. The addressable audience, and we're doing some work on this at the moment, the addressable audience globally for our products, if you like, for all of your product, isn't infinite. There's a set number of people interested at any given time. So it's difficult to get cut through, and more focus on the creative and the creative use of distribution strategies can help drive higher returns.
Yeah, I'd agree. There's, as Andy said, the segmentation, targeting aspect of it, but also what are you sharing? Is it just sign up for this information session, we're recruiting, you apply here? The content that you're offering, think about the value exchange. What are the audience getting from you? Is this something of use that makes them want to engage with your content, or is it just bland marketing material? Maybe if you want to get candidates signed up to something, offer them something of value that they can enter a submission form to download. So a PDF doc with advice on how to apply to business school, or we've released a report on how much an MBA costs. Those sort of practical things. Think about the climate now. What can you offer people? 5 things you need to know about applying to business school during COVID-19. Think about the value exchange is key, and that's across social media as well. You can't just post to say apply to school, applications are open. You need to offer people something to get something in return. So definitely target and think about who you're targeting, and then base the content you're creating off that, and think about what you're offering.
Yeah, it's the classic Simon Sinek starting with why approach to it. Goodness knows there's enough words, pictures, and video in the world already. So make sure it's got a reason to exist in the first place. Otherwise, it does unfortunately end up as wallpaper.
Great stuff. Thanks very much for that. Just picking up on some of those points, someone else has asked, given the current situation, marketing budgets are being cut dramatically, and they're just asking if you've got any advice for effective content marketing that's perhaps more cost effective or without any paid element.
I'm going to let Marco go first this time.
Yes, certainly. I mean, you can create your own content marketing. I guess the paid element, the challenge comes in on distributing the content. So on social media, it is tougher to do so without paying for a social media campaign. However, there's no reason why you can't create a piece of content that attracts an audience without paying, and if you have a writer in-house or a fairly inexpensive freelance team to create that content for you, that can be done too. So in this current climate, think about again what audiences are interested in. Think about what your messaging is, what your audience's changing priorities are, what you can offer them that they might be interested in, and that can be useful longer term as well. So yeah, I think my answer is yes, you can create content and think about using existing assets. Business schools have every single student has a story to tell. So say you have 50 students in each cohort, there's 50 pieces of content as a minimum you can create from that, all with unique stories because everyone's unique. So use the students, use alumni, professors, all the existing assets you have to communicate the benefits of going to your school in a subtle but ultimately effective way. And if your class, whatever your strength as a school is, for instance, if you're particularly strong in finance, think about starting a regular post around careers in finance, for example, and using expertise from your professors. And it doesn't have to be a very detailed big post, but it can be something you start getting a bit of traction behind, and sharing on social media, financial tip of the day or personal finance tip. What are people worried about at the moment? What are people interested in? Those are things to consider. And if you have the staff to write something up in-house, or again, if it's just a case of creating content externally, that can be done, and you can structure it and promote it in a way that doesn't necessarily need massive investment. Again, search can be free if you're structuring your content in the right way for Google search and your site is set up well. So there's a real opportunity by looking at Google search traffic. What are people searching for at the moment? You can look on Google Trends and try and create a piece of content to target that, and then that will get you return traffic monthly for free, rather than having to keep paying for that. So there are ways it can certainly be done, and that is fundamentally what we do as a publisher with a lot of our native, non-sponsored content. We write general news content all the time, and we certainly don't put a lot of money behind any of it. So we're also always looking for what people are interested in and how to target them.
Apologies for the noise in the background. The perils of home working. I'm sat next to a printer in our office, and one of my kids has just decided to print something. So apologies to everyone for the background noise there. Just building off of what Marco said, it was a bit of a buzzword a few years ago, influencer marketing. You have with your existing cohort, you have a team of ready champions of your brand, so exercise them. There's a number of case studies of schools who have mobilized their alumni or their existing classes to create some really powerful videos, campus tours. Campus tours is not going to be appropriate at the moment, but but some real sort of useful first person articulation of the virtues of the program or study at that particular institution. So I think that's definitely something that I would be looking at. The other thing is, and Marco wouldn't say this because it'll mean that he gets even more approaches. The other thing is to think about your contact books of journalists. This is where PR can be a useful tool for you. So making sure you know the sites where your audience is going to, so see how you can get a presence on those platforms. Have you got an interesting piece of research? Have you got does your dean have a particular focus on something? Does your does your faculty have a perspective, particularly if it's a positive perspective at the moment, that's newsworthy, that's that you can approach journalists with in order to get some coverage on the different sites that are out there that specialise in this area. So there are a few tools at your disposal there.
Great stuff. Thank you very much. A question's come in regarding segmentation based on Generation Z or Z, and they're basically sort of considering how best to communicate with Generation Z. They're asking if it's worth engaging with platforms such as podcasting or TikTok, or if that's just a fad and they should be more focused on the actual content towards this demographic as opposed to the platform.
Go on.
Go ahead. It's an interesting one. I'm very sorry, David, but I might have to mention a rival and say, well, I won't mention them, but I've just written an article for another accreditation body about Generation Z itself. So it's a very interesting point, and it's worth noting and knowing who Generation Z are. Obviously, it's not an exact science, looking at different generations, but it's interesting to look at who Generation Z are, how they engage with content. So there's a lot of things to bear in mind. These new types of platforms, you're thinking of sort of TikTok and areas like that. There's no doubt that brands will move into them more and more. And yes, definitely it's worth investigating, and it will be a case of experiment, test, maybe fail and try again as you get to know these new platforms. Podcasts is a very difficult place. It's not as direct as sort of getting a click through from a website, but certainly podcasts are very useful in terms of brand awareness and can lead people to associate things with your brand further down the line. So if your business school started its own podcast, perhaps on something fairly unique, fairly different, then people would become interested in your business school. And certainly lots of people are taking that up. But I think just a few quick things I can just share about Gen Z, which might be helpful for people thinking about targeting them. When you're thinking about people's average attention span compared to millennials, Gen Z have 8 seconds average attention span, millennials have 12 seconds. So even more important to get to them straight ahead. But at the same time, GMAC data on it says that they still make decisions carefully. So after their first consideration of business school, Gen Z candidates tend to move through the pipeline at a slower pace than their millennial counterparts. So interesting sort of contrast there. And obviously Gen Z are media savvy. They know about marketing, they know about digital ads more than anyone before. This is a generation more than any other that you need to be clever and subtle with your marketing and transparent with it and say, yes, this is a piece of sponsored content, but it's going to tell you this, it's going to offer you this, because they'll be able to suss out pretty quickly if you're just trying to sell them something. And especially in the current environment, and I think everyone's aware of it with recent studies, Gen Z are a generation that are very driven by social impact, very engaged with social trends and movements. They've grown up in a time where there's been lots of social change, and they are able to engage with it on an unprecedented scale through the internet, where other generations may not have been able to, and lead it as well. So thinking about that in your communications is important as well. How can you engage their interests there? So after speaking about Gen Z for a couple of minutes, I've forgotten the initial question, but hopefully that was some fairly useful information. Ultimately, yes, it's worth investigating these new and upcoming channels, but it's going to be tricky. But it's a challenge that ultimately, often the people, the companies, the organisations who find out how to work these channels first are the most successful over time. You see that with influencers; those who are there first end up being the most successful. So definitely get in early and experiment.
Yeah, full disclosure, I'm not a big fan of these big sort of bracketing of everyone who's born between one date and another as a particular type. I think it's a little simplistic, but that said, Marco's made some of the key points there. The social awareness seems to be much more significant. The research data that we've seen as well also suggests that whilst they are more skeptical of brands, they actually are more brand loyal than the millennials and generations beforehand. So if you can get onto their radar, the chances are that they're going to remember you. With regard to podcasting and TikTok, and I'm aware we're up against time, so very quickly, podcasts are certainly not going anywhere, but they are expensive, not to produce, but to market. You've got to, once you've produced the podcast, you've got to tell people that it exists, and that takes a chunk of work. And at the moment, the tracking and analytics on podcast listenership just aren't there at the moment for you to be able to put together a proper testing plan for it, and that so that's my feeling on that. We've tested it and found that it just we just weren't getting enough back from it, enough data back from it to be able to say whether or not it was worthwhile or not. And I think that lends into my next point, which is don't try things, test things, make sure you know why you're doing it in the first place, have a plan, know what you want to get out of it, and have a plan in place to be able to track whether or not you've achieved that goal. And that's the only way to do it. TikTok isn't a fad by any means, but it is very young at the moment in terms of its audience profile, and maybe too young for graduate management education marketing on as it stands. But again, if you're looking at it, if you want to test it, it's certainly it's more significant in China. So if you're looking at a Chinese audience, then how do you do that sort of targeting, and how can you test some different executions over there? So I would certainly look at that.
Great stuff. Thank you very much. Unfortunately, I think that's all we're going to have time for this session. But Andy and Marco, thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us today, for your insight and for your practical advice. It was incredibly useful. And also thank you very much for being able to answer so many of those marketing conundrums. So I think, we really appreciate that. Thank you. I also want to thank GMAC and Business Because for their support with this event. You can meet the representatives from GMAC and all our partners and sponsors at our virtual exhibition. And I'd urge everyone to go there to help build your network and find out more about the innovations available in the marketplace to help you manage your way through the new normal. If you've already signed up for sessions, you will have or will be about to receive emails from us with links to join. But just to remind you, I've popped the next few sessions into the chat box for you, so you'll be able to find them there. I've also popped the password for the delegate list for this session, so as you can access that via our website and network with the other people who have taken part. So you'll see that just in your chat box. Tomorrow at 2 p.m. BST, we have our session on how the MBA in business skills can be a driving force for diversity and inclusion. And then at 2:30, we have another session on lifelong learning and its impact in today's world. And that's followed at 3:30 p.m. BST with a session from GoToWebinar by LogMeIn on tips and tricks for running successful training sessions on digital platforms. So as I mentioned, you can register for all those sessions using the link in the chat box. If you've missed any sessions at all, I've also put a link in the chat box as to how you can find those, and you can just access them via the AMBA or BGA websites. Please remember there's loads of sessions still to come, and you can see all the remaining sessions and register via our website. So all that remains to be said is thank you once again to Andy, Marco, Business Because, and GMAC. Thank you once again, and I'll look forward to seeing you all, hopefully tomorrow, on another session at the forum. Goodbye.
Thanks all.
Thanks everyone. Goodbye.